All right, we're recording. Hi, Dana.
Hi, Bonnie.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm giddy that we're doing this. I'm so excited.
Me too.
So, Dana and I were just talking that we're doing this for completely selfish reasons,
Mhm.
first and foremost,
Absolutely.
because it sounded like fun to us. And if you're watching this, then it's because it's because we thought it turned out okay and that somebody else might find it fun. So, welcome if you're joining us. The name of my little talk show here that I've just invented a few days ago is called Andiamo.
Woo!
Andiamo.
Andiamo!
Andiamo, which is Italian for let's go. Would you like to hear the backstory of the name?
Love to hear the backstory of the name.
So I was traveling in Italy with some friends, and I did not personally experience this. My friends shared the story with me because the group had broken up, and like went off to do this thing and some of us went off to do this thing. So a couple of other girlfriends in the group had gone out for the evening, and they flagged down a cab somewhere in the streets of Tuscany, central
Okay.
Tuscany, and found this really entertaining cab driver who was teaching them Italian and also hitting on them at the same time, of course.
Perfect.
And he said, if you only learn one phrase or one word, all you need to know is andiamo, let's go. And we thought, well, yeah, because you're hitting on them. So
It's Italy. So you have to
It's
make those
Italy.
assumptions for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's where the name came from.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we always
So
catch those little things.
what's that?
Yeah, it's always those little things, right? That you pick up off of travel that stick with you that you're not always expecting, for sure.
Absolutely. Those are the
Yeah.
best souvenirs,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Agreed.
Yeah. And the ones that we remember, whether or not we have a photograph or a video
Mm-hmm.
of it, those memories they're so good. They take root
Mm-hmm.
and they stay with
Agreed.
us. Yeah. So let's keep talking about one of our favorite topics, which is travel.
Yes. Want to get back
Yeah.
out there and do much more of it sometime soon.
And we will. We
Yeah,
will. I'm
absolutely.
optimistic. I'm optimistic. And in the meantime, I had a friend just the other day point out, she said, and aren't you grateful that you already have so much of that,
Mhm.
that you've already experienced so much travel? Because I do. And I was so glad she asked me that question because it did kind of shine the light on how that can keep us going until
Mhm.
until we actually can physically get back out there and start adventuring
Absolutely.
again. Have you
Yeah,
found that to
because
be true too?
yes, I have because we're always my general personality is when I in the morning and I'm at work, for example, all by 9 o'clock ask people around me what's for lunch, right? I'm always like several hours ahead of for what's next. And while we're on a vacation, we're planning for the next vacation. That is very typical. So during this time, I mean, we have found, I think like you, we're watching a lot of different travel shows or design shows abroad. And part of it is to reflect and to get so excited about what we've seen and what we've done. And the other part of it is just getting excited. What am I planning for the next time? Because there is a next time, right? There's something to
Yeah.
look forward to. And those are the things that just keep you engaged and going and connected with the world.
Yeah, exactly. That reminds me of something Chris and I often talk about. When we first started traveling together, we came up with the tradition. I don't even remember how it came about, but we started, I think it might have been like even seeing another family like waiting on the curb for their airport shuttle to pick them up at the hotel. Like they were at the end of their trip and we were at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and they were waiting to get picked up to go back to the airport, and they all just looked so sad. Like they were all just standing there like no one was excited to be getting on this airport shuttle. And we like totally get that, right? And so we
Right.
started calling the last day of our trips the sad day.
It's true.
And there's a lot of truth in that. And after a few trips of that, I got tired of that because I was like, no, I don't want to end on a down note. Like let's focus on, oh, what's next, what's going to be
Yep.
next. And it's so true about planning the next adventure while you're
Mhm.
out adventuring.
Yep. You celebrate that last day, right? There is a sadness. You're always kind of wondering, what did I leave on the table? What did we, what were we unable to see? But again, that is just an extension next time, right? I
Yeah.
always look at something that I'm going to be back.
Yes.
That's how I have to envision it, because if I ever left somewhere thinking I'm never going to see this again, that would be the sad component to me. So it's what's next, what can I do? And yeah, celebrate that moment when you're at the end, because you've got this great experience.
Yeah. And I really feel like that helps you stay present in a trip, and not get so manic in that pace of like having to pack it all in at once.
Right.
Like if you believe that this doesn't have to be your last time and that there
Mhm.
can be another time if we want there to be, then we just get to enjoy that adventure and we don't have to do it all in one shot,
Right.
and we get to come back and do more if we want to, or do
Yeah,
favorite things again.
and we'll talk about that more, because I think that's one of the key things when you even travel with kids. Not trying to pack it all in and be happy in the moment and let things
Mm-hmm.
play out is, you have to do it that way. It's the best
Yeah.
way to travel, far and away.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, and let's use that as a segue then to talk
Okay.
more about traveling with kids. So, for anyone else watching this, I'll just do a little setup and I'll let Dana elaborate. But this is one of, so Dana and I have known each other for years and years and years and years. We met working at Disneyland, and probably more like sisters than friends in a lot of ways. And one of my favorite, I have a lot of favorite things about Dana, but one of my favorite stories about Dana is when she and her husband Frank were adopting their daughter, Maddie. And one of the reasons Maddie's birth mother chose them to adopt Maddie is because of their love of travel. And that is part of what they want, part of what she wanted for her daughter's life. So, do you want to share a little bit more about that, Dana? Because
Yeah.
that still gives me goosebumps to this day.
Me too.
That.
Because when you go through the adoption process, and it's changed over the years with the internet, etc. But usually, you put out an application and you have a letter about yourself, and you usually put together just like one page that has photos that just kind of represent who you are. And mine were a compilation of travels that Frank and I had had together, and also of our pets. And sure enough, our attorneys even told us this. A birth mom they'll look for something that they see a connection. It could be a dress you were wearing in the picture. It could be anything, but they noticed the two things. One were that we had pets, and that was important to them, but that we were traveling, and they wanted their child to see the world. And so that is something that we have kept consistently. And there's been two occasions, and the most recent one when my second daughter was born. I remember going to the very same spot in Paris along the Seine with the Eiffel Tower in the background, and we did a family photo again at the same picture and the same as just when it was Frank and I. And that's what the birth mom looked at and saw Frank and I on the Seine in front of the Eiffel Tower and said, that's what I want for my daughter. So I mean, that when I'm at that spot, it just brings, a tear to my eye, utter happiness.
Oh, so cool. I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah. And I love that like adoption is part of a travel story, and travel is part of an adoption story. I mean, we could talk about that all day long. So
Yep.
just another
Future episodes.
Yeah, definitely. It's another testament to the power of travel. I mean, it helped create an adoption. It helped attract Maddie to you guys. And none of us can imagine life without Maddie.
Right.
So
Travel got Maddie. So we lucked out.
So good. So something else I loved about you guys after you adopted Maddie was that you pretty quickly were right back out on the road traveling with a newborn, with an infant.
Yes. So yeah, we have traveled. We're lucky enough, and my husband teaches, Frank teaches. So we kind of focus, summer is going to be our big trip just because of school and his job. And we really try to go every other year to Europe and try to visit different spots and interject in there different places. We've been right Central and South America, all over the States. We try to mix it up, but Europe is probably where our hearts are more than anything. So going every other year, we have now gone on that trip, that long flight, with every age group. So we've gone with a 2-month-old, a 13-month-old, a toddler, a kid, a tween, and a teenager. So I have opinions on what the best ages are and what the best ages aren't, but they all what they all have in common, for the most part, is things for a child are big to begin with, right? And when you show them this big world, it is just how they react to it. And you start to see things, like they say as a parent, like you see things through your children's eyes. The cadence becomes very different with how you vacation, how you slow down, how you take the cues from them, right? You let them guide. Because Bonnie, I think you and I learned this fast at Disneyland. We saw so many parents and kids that were tired or hungry or exhausted. And you saw a lot of people just trying to push through everything, and they had like a checklist, like they had to do it. And you would see frustration, you'd see sad kids, sad parents in a place that should be happy, where you should take the moment and be in it. And I think having that all through our, experiences being younger, it made me really quickly pay attention to my kids. What is their pace? Are they hungry? Where do we need to jump on a bus? Where are we able to walk? And take cues from them to help guide so that we don't have any huge emotional breakdowns.
I love that. I think that's like making me pause and think of how, I think one of the stereotypes around traveling with kids, and I'll admit, I don't have a lot of personal example of traveling with small kids, limited. You have way more experience in that than I do. But I think one of the stereotypes around traveling with kids is that it's so frenzied and busy all the time, because that's kind of the energy that kids have. But what I heard you just describing is, if we allow ourselves to actually take cues from our kids, that they, in a way, they're kind of helping you slow the pace down.
Exactly. So we are, and again, every family is going to be different. We are not the type of family that goes on a tropical vacation and sits by a pool. That would just my personality. It doesn't fit it. I can't sit there and then just sit and watch and stare. I'm a person who probably has to be on the move a little bit more, which that's where Europe comes into play, because you can, right? Whether you're in a museum, you're just walking on the street, right? You are on a metro or a subway. There's things going on all around you all the time. And one, there's some goodness to that frenziness. Kids connect with that in a way, and I think they are just enamored by it. So let them kind of absorb that energy at the same time as you just going, okay, I'm going to take cues that when they are, let's have fun walking, seeing outside, looking up, looking all around, pointing out things and letting them absorb it and get excited, and then get tired and then go, okay, there's a double-decker bus. Now it's time to get on the top of that. Slow it down, let them take a nap on it, or get on the subway and do the same thing. Just listen to their little bodies, and it'll slow you down too, and that's not a bad thing. You're not going to hit everything on your list, and that's okay, because I love to eat, you love to eat, we love to eat. And so you have these agendas, right? You're like, oh, I'm going to hit this restaurant and that restaurant. And that's a set schedule, right? That's hard. That's really hard to accomplish with kids. So there are things like, wow, they may not make it to that restaurant, but guess what? There's a street vendor food. Get them the street vendor food. Don't hold back on your desires, right? It's good, because it'll backfire terribly on you. Get them what they need when they need it, and then they'll roll with you. Take the lead from them.
Yeah. Oh, so good. So good. There's another, I think, common stereotype about traveling with kids, and specifically infants, babies, which is, it's going to be too hard. And I think a lot of parents avoid that and have a lot of assumptions around what a nightmare that could potentially be.
Yeah.
Am I remembering correctly that one of your experiences has been, and maybe it depends on the type of trip that you do, but that there are so many advantages to traveling when a child is that tiny and is that young. Am I remembering that right?
You remember it perfectly. So a lot of people will, when you have a newborn, it's exhausting just in general. And then you'll hear a lot of people say a year down the road, wow, it was so much easier when they were sleeping or laying there, or couldn't roll off the couch, or couldn't walk away. It's kind of the same thing. So with Charlotte, our second, she was 2 months old, and we went to Europe for a full month. It was over the summer. Everyone was out of school. That was, and if I can say this, possibly the best month of my entire life, because it removed me from being at home, having to take visitors and entertain people coming into my house. It took away the housework, the chores. I only away had to be responsible for my baby and my family. That was it. And, you know, a 2-month-old pretty much is just nursing or eating and doing really a whole lot of nothing. Yeah, in the plane ride, they're eating, but the smaller they are, it's actually relatively easy. Now, there are things like shots, you know, you want to make sure with your doctor, everything's okay, that you're not going to somewhere that might have any kind of, you know, breakout of something at the moment. But, you know, as long as everything is okay with your doctor, it was quite a bit easier. Toddlers are a little tougher, just a little bit.
Would you like to elaborate on that at all?
They just, you know, again, they move,
I'm sure
right?
you have no stories about traveling with toddlers.
You know, my favorite was definitely super infant is easy. That's a no-brainer because frankly, you can go into a pub anywhere and you're fine. A kid like 9 and 10 is magic, right? Because kids like crawling on rocks, and rocks might be attached to a castle, right? They love public transportation. Like the simple thing of public transit in a foreign city is like, this is a great thing to do. And
especially when in Southern California, we don't really have that infrastructure. No. Public transportation is not part of our daily lives.
Right.
So that is such a new thing for them, but so simple at the same time. Simple. And inexpensive or free.
And I'm glad you kind of, you know, transitioned to that when we travel, we pretty much, we never stay anywhere elaborate. We know how to eat like more like street food, vendor food. We're not sitting down all the time at restaurants. We're getting baguettes to go, right? And you're eating in a park. You're staying at an Airbnb, but things like that, museums are free for the most part. All that public transit, it's cheap and it's amazing. And again, they love it. They look around, they absorb the energy. It's new and interesting to them.
Yeah.
I love that.
So going back to infant travel and the month that you spent in Europe, I remember you talking about too how wonderful Europeans were with you and with an infant, and even breastfeeding in public, and what a different experience that was for you compared to the US or even you know, being at home.
Yeah, so that was fascinating and something I didn't anticipate. So on that trip, we went to Austria, where my husband has a lot of family. And then we went to France, and we were also in England. So everyone here usually uses the covers around themselves when they're nursing. And I remember I had the cover on and I was by a lot of family, and they all were staring at me and asking, what's the contraption? What's going on under there? Like they were shocked. They didn't use anything like that. That if you were nursing, you flat out just nursed in public. It wasn't seen as anything disrespectful or weird. They were actually all just kind of shocked. In France, totally open. I could be in a restaurant. And I remember being in a restaurant, it was really, really hot. And you can imagine like post-pregnancy, you overheat anyway. And when you're nursing, you get really hot, and then you have to wear that thing over you. And I remember just being overwhelmed and exhausted. And I was in a restaurant. And at one point I just looked at Frank and said, it's coming off. I'm just nursing. So here I am just nursing a kid. And the waiter came over, no big deal, probably a guy in his 30s, looked me straight in the eye, had a conversation with me, didn't bat an eye. Like it was nothing to anybody. Like it was so matter of fact. There was no put that away. Now in England, they're probably more like us. I was either complimented by young women as if I was making a stand for women's rights. It was that big of a deal. And I was looked at by some of the older women like that shouldn't be happening. And I was covered up in England the entire time. I wasn't disrespectful. That was the one that was just probably a little bit more odd. But the other two were far more accepting than we are here, I think.
Yeah. Which is part of what I love about travel, is just being exposed to different cultural norms and traditions. And you know, I think when we don't travel, it's really easy to fall into the thinking that the whole world is like our world. And I mean, that for me is what was so opening up for me when I started traveling, was realizing that, wow, actually the majority of the world is not like my world. and there's just so much education that comes from that, so much
Yes.
growth in respect and compassion, and so much fascination personally for me that comes from that, is just learning how other people live.
And not only that, right? I'm a totally different person because of my travel, but I'm sure you see it the same way. I see myself as an ambassador. Everywhere I go, how I say, how I behave, how I have a conversation with individuals, how people engage, I am representing my country. Because if you just sit down and talk to people, they will ask you a ton of questions. And frankly, it can get political. They
Yep.
can be asking you questions culturally.
Yeah.
And I found in every situation, it's a blast. You can have incredible dialogue. And another example would be in France when Charlotte was 2 months old. We were in one restaurant. She was getting super fussy, and there was another couple, and it was actually a German couple in the restaurant, and so they're strangers, mind you. And also everybody in the wait staff, like, people try to be very accommodating. They love babies in France. It's probably, of all the countries I've been to, the most child friendly when you go there. They were offering to help. I mean, waiters would offer to hold your baby, but these strangers who were Germans came over to me, and the woman said, "Both of my kids are grown. I would like you to have a nice dinner. Do you want me to hold your baby while you eat?" And she actually meant that. Like,
And
I'll hold your baby.
you probably trusted her too.
I looked at them and went, yeah. And they sat at the table and they held Charlotte and they played with her and they rocked her and I ate. And it was just a connection of community that they saw that I needed a moment to eat. And you would never see that here, ever. People would think you're crazy, you're going to steal my baby. And I could tell it was just this honest, heartfelt offer to me. So that's another thing, being able to trust people and connect with people. And then we talked to them in more detail about what he did and why they were living in France. And he was working for, I think it was BMW. He was with automotive, just transferred there. So, right, you learn so much.
You do. It's such a bonding experience.
Mm-hmm.
I love this conversation, and my brain is like pinging in 12 different directions
Sorry.
of like
Sorry.
what I want to ask you next.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's like, no, it's all good. It's all good. What was that reminding me of that you were just talking about? Well, yeah, that travel is just such a bonding experience and cross-cultural, right? Like, I
Yep.
think too, people have assumptions about going to foreign countries, and we hear a lot about like how Americans are perceived or how Americans are treated. And I do think a lot of that, I think we own a lot of that. I think we train people how to see us and how to treat us. And so
Yeah.
I know Chris and I are always, it's not about not being true to ourselves. Like, we're still ourselves, but we do take the time to educate ourselves and to learn about the culture that we're going to visit. And we stay very aware that we are visitors. And we go in with very few expectations, because it's not our home, it's their home. And the more we go in from that place and with that mindset of being respectful towards another culture and the people of that culture, I can honestly say that I have yet to go to a place and not be treated lovely.
Agreed. 100%. I have never, and you hear the typical thing, people go to Paris and they have a rough experience. You just need to educate yourself. And what a lot of people don't realize is Americans are friendly, right? I think genuinely we are a little bit louder. We like to smile. We're very engaging. And you go to France, for example, and they're just simply that initial smile, or kind of like, I'll use the term aggressive. That's how they see it. They see it as fake, because why would you be so smiley and so happy around a person you don't even know, right? It's a cultural misperception of who we are and what we're trying to do. But yeah, just respect, paying attention to what the reactions are around you, because I've never, I will always say I'm American. I don't apologize, for anything. In fact, I want people to know so we can engage in conversation. But like you said, I have never had a negative experience with a country, with a city, or anything like that. You can have one-offs with people, but wow, like that can happen up the street at grocery store, right?
Yeah,
It's no big deal.
exactly. That's kind of normal day-to-day life
Yeah, that's
anywhere.
normal. We all deal
Hmm.
with that. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like to the point that you made about how it really does. I think it helps them feel differently about us too being
Yes.
there, and being more open to us being there.
Yes.
And they
Mhm.
do, like when we come in and we're not intimidating, then
Mhm.
then they are more open and curious about wanting to learn about Americans too, and about the
Always.
US. And like you said, just as we have assumptions about, different people in different
Mhm.
cultures, they have assumptions about Americans as well
100%.
that are not
100%.
accurate. And
Yep.
it just opens up an opportunity to have such a beautiful open conversation
Mhm.
with people from different cultures. And I, like you, I love helping people see Americans maybe differently than they have been taught to see them,
Absolutely.
or they've heard about us. Or
Yes.
I remember talking with a gentleman in Japan who was very curious, and had so many, like, I wanted to spend the whole time asking him questions, and he had just as many questions for me about Americans. And he truly believed that and he came, like you said, it can go political because
Yeah.
people are just so curious. and
Mhm.
and I'm always an open book with people when I'm
Mhm.
traveling, because I think it's a great way to bring people together and have conversations that you wouldn't normally have. And so he did kind of start to go a little political, and he truly believed that it was commonplace for Americans to carry a gun, that all Americans carry guns.
A lot.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and he literally, I think the way it came up in conversation was he asked me, how do I carry my gun? And I didn't even know what he was talking about. I was like, what do you mean? And he was struggling through English but doing an amazing job.
Mhm.
And I finally saw that, oh, he thinks we all just have guns, and that we all walk around with guns all day long, and that
Mhm.
that's a normal thing, for Americans. And so for me to be able to share with him that I don't even own a gun
Mhm.
was mind-boggling to him. Like, he had never heard that side or that example before. So and it just created a whole nother conversation with him.
Right. It was even, I 2 years ago, we were in Berlin, which if anybody hasn't been there, recommend it. I think that place is amazing. We had a great, I was on the plane, and we got kind of separated as a family, which can happen. So I was sitting next to a businessman who was trying to get just down to Munich for a trip. And then he's American, has a conversation. His conversation, led by him, started going down the path of Americans' perception of women and would we ever elect a woman president. That was his question because he has Angela Merkel, right? And so he was asking a ton of questions. I'm like, I'm on an airplane. So it was, I mean, and it was respectful. It was a great conversation. He had certain opinions that he was looking to either get validated or talk through. But yeah, it's wow. Wow. Where else am I going to get that, right? To be able to talk to somebody like that. It's open yourself up, be an open book, have a conversation. It's everything. And let your kids watch that too. Let your kids watch the conversation happen and see what your answers are and what the questions are. I think that's incredibly important for them to listen to all of those, at the dinner table, you hear it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that too. I think there is something different about those kinds of conversations, when you're traveling. I think it I think it almost creates a little safety bubble, knowing that you're probably never going to meet again.
Right.
And so, like, this is our shot. Like, let's
Hmm.
just go for it. Let's make the most of these 20 minutes that we have together,
Yeah.
or 8 hours on an airplane. And let's just make the most of that time together,
Hmm.
and be willing to talk about anything, and it's okay.
Hmm.
And we can do that respectfully, knowing that we are going to kind of be going our separate ways,
Hmm.
and that we can both leave more enlightened and more
Yes,
moved in ways that we hadn't if we had never met that person, and that person had never come into our world, whether it's on an
exactly.
airplane or sitting on a park bench in another
All
country.
day, all day long, every day. It's fun. I love that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we touched, is there anything more you want to say about traveling with kids or different ages
Yeah,
before
I mean,
we,
I will just say, different countries, I think, do have different, what Americans probably need to be prepared for. Most countries don't have children's meals and things like that, but a lot of countries, they will accommodate all day long. Like if you have a kid, you don't necessarily need to order off the menu. They will just bring you something. So don't be intimidated by anything like that. Like I said, I think France is incredibly good at that. Austria is great at that. Then you go to some countries where it's simple, like Italy, where pasta can be there. But just because they don't have this trained set thing that you might be used to, it doesn't mean they won't accommodate in every single situation possible. And the other thing I will tell you, I love to do, and I think it has been the number one thing of every family trip we've ever done, we go on a bike ride, whether it is a tour of the city, like a historical tour, a funny tour, a countryside tour. If you have little kids, infants, you get on they sit in the front or the back, or they have a trailer bike, or your old enough kid could get on the bike by themselves. There is something about bike riding and going on those tours that there is something for everyone along the way. So that is something we hit up in every city. And in fact, when I retire, my dream job is to be a bike tour guide in some other country. Like legit.
that's brilliant.
I'm going
Yeah,
to do
that's
that.
brilliant. Oh
Mm-hmm.
my gosh, because it packs everything into one, including like staying
Yes.
active and physical
Yep.
and
I love it. It's my dream job.
it's easy on the joints.
Yeah, just bike ride. And most of it's flat. I don't really want to go to the mountainside, but I'll stay in the flat cities. It'll be good.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I might steal
Yeah,
that from you.
sure. Yeah, we can maybe open our own new business together.
Well, there we go. That among the 27 other ones we've talked about
That's true.
starting.
Sorry. We'll figure
No,
it
I
out.
love it. I love it. Well, this feels wonderful to me to
Me too.
actually, I mean, we like we said, we could keep going on and on for hours, but maybe just to wrap up our conversation
Hmm.
today, I I came up with a few kind of rapid fire style questions. Are you open
Wow.
to that about
Yes,
travel? Okay.
absolutely.
So I just off the top of your head, whatever comes to you first, most meaningful place that you visited. And you can interpret that any way you want. It can be a location, it can be a specific
Hmm.
place or
Um,
monument or
Probably because it's been kind of recent, Berlin.
okay.
Yeah, Berlin, because the recent history and what you don't understand from not having that history back at home. Um, the way they encapsulate and talk about their history, what has been recent, and what you see around you that's still relevant and real, and people have experienced it. I think I was just taken back and wowed by that city. So it just kind of it hit me, and I
Hmm.
felt it. Yeah.
Beautiful. So now when you think of Berlin,
Hmm.
in your just in your opinion and your experience of Berlin, what color is Berlin to you?
Green. It's green.
In what way?
Everything. It is a city of the especially in the summer, you get these long days, right? Anything you do, the sheer amount of trees in that city are overwhelming, and it's almost like a forest within the city. And the way the light, because you're pretty far north, right? The way the light quality through 10 o'clock in the evening comes through and filters through all of the leaves, and everywhere you're going, you see that glow of green in every part of the city that you encounter. And it feels alive, and it feels youthful, and it feels relevant. It's green.
Mm, lovely. I want to
It's
go. I've never been to Berlin, so
amazing.
you're
Yeah.
bumping that one up on my list.
It's pretty inexpensive too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
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 For families.
Hmm. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's inexpensive. It has a huge Vietnamese population, which I never knew that so if you stay in any of the areas that were the old East Berlin before the wall came down, a lot of Vietnamese, being communist pre the time period, relocated. So you have
Mm-hmm.
this incredible amount of you have a lot of Vietnamese and Vietnamese food there. And to the west, you have all the Turkish food, because Turkey is one of the biggest immigrant groups for Germany is one of the biggest immigrant groups for people coming from Turkey. So the quality of different foods up there is incredible, along with just some of the German food. Yeah, it's full of surprises. things you never knew. You're like, wow. And yeah, when you go to restaurants and stuff, it's like, when you compare it to big American cities, it's inexpensive. It's not like a London or a Paris or New York. It is an affordable place to live. And yeah, just, and the most bread varieties anywhere in the world, even more than France, Germany.
Ooh, well, I mean, do we need any other
Bread.
reason to go to Berlin besides bread?
No, bread.
Go for the bread.
100% bread.
Well, and my next question was going to be, and maybe you've just answered it, is when you think of Berlin, what does Berlin taste like to you? What taste comes?
Oh, so they have, so here's a typical thing is called currywurst. And so basically, right, they love sausages in Germany, right? So you have, this was created during the time where you had, it was occupied by all corners, right? You had the British there, you had the Americans there. And so you started really getting this compilation of flavors in that part of Germany. So they would take, so the British loved the curry, they mixed the curry and the ketchup, and then they had the sausage. And basically that's what currywurst is. It's a sausage sliced up, a curry sauce over it with bread and French fries. That's what it has all together. And so it's this, it's a little spicy, and then you put paprika, like, you know, just seasoning on top of it, or paprika. I say it like German paprika, who knows? But that's what it is. It's a compilation of flavors. You get that Vietnamese, you get the Turkish, you get the German. That's what's just unique. And people, I think, when they think of Northern Germany, or they think it's all just meats, no, it's incredible salads and fresh salad dressings and a lot of vegetables. Meat is just a side component to it, but the currywurst is street food.
Yum.
It's like
Now
a
I'm
taco.
hungry. Yeah.
Yep, sorry.
With French fries.
With French fries. Yes,
With
and the
French
curry
fries.
sauce over the French fries.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yummy.
so good.
Yeah, and I love combining that with what you were talking about with the other cultures.
Mm-hmm.
It is so true. Like, I love being surprised when traveling like that, right? And at first, it seems random, like to see a huge Vietnamese community in Berlin.
Right.
At first, you think this is so random, but that's the invitation to slow down and get curious and wonder, how did this come to be? And then when you learn the story behind it, you realize it's not random, it's completely logical. That's there, and it becomes part of the fabric of that country.
Right. And just, it's, and this is things what we will spend money on. So again, this goes back to kids. So we try to stay away, like if it's a bike thing, we try to stay away from a group tour. And if we can, we'll spend a little bit more, just our family of 4. Because if we have to stop, I don't want to have this guilt that we have to stop because my kid can't keep up, or I have another question. I'd rather have just a tour guide or somebody with us that can go at our pace and answer to my kids also. So I will cut corners on where I stay. I will cut corners on what kind of car I might be in. I will cut corners everywhere, but not on that, because they will help you weave together what the story and the song of that city is. And that's important to me. When I come away, that's why you're asking about meaningful. There are some places you visit where you're like, that was an amazing church, or I liked that meal. There are some places you look at and go, I will be back here again and again, because part of me is left here. Like I am just eating this up. So yeah, that's well worth it.
I love that tip about private tours, because I will admit, for most of my traveling life, I've been very anti-tour, just because I know myself and I know how I enjoy traveling, and I know how I love to experience a place. And I find it hard to do that. I'm not against the idea of tour groups. I think I think they make sense for some people.
For some people.
Yeah. But for me, I just know that I know how I like to experience a place, and I have a hard time doing that when I'm part of a big group. Yeah. I'm always the last one. I'm always the one catching up, because I want to stay in a place longer, or take more photos, or because photos are my souvenirs as well.
Yes.
But I love that tip about a private tour. And I agree. I think, oftentimes we can assume and steer away from those because we think they are pricey, but oftentimes I'm surprised that they're actually not as expensive as one might think they are. And we just had a similar wonderful experience in Paris. We were in Paris last year. It was my 3rd or 4th time being there, but Chris's first time in Paris.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And one of the highlights of our time in Paris was booking a private car tour. And we had done some research and read online. A lot of people were recommending doing it at night versus during the day for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's less traffic. So
Yes.
if you're going to drive with a French driver who the style of driving there is pretty much like you're on a racetrack all the time.
Absolutely.
Like
Yep.
I fully want to experience driving with a French driver. Well, we can't do that during the day in gridlock, but we can do that at night when the streets are more open. And so this guy in this teeny tiny little car was literally, I mean, it was the ride of our lives. We were like zipping in and out of, you know, main streets and side alleys, and he would go where construction was happening because he knew he could fit his car through it anyway. It was so much fun. And so there was the less traffic thing at night, but then also at night you get to see the city comes alive in a different way with all the lights, right? And that's really beautiful, and you can get to vantage points and see lights in a different way than if you're just on foot. So, but the real value of having the private driver was he actually took the time to talk to us. He had a standard itinerary that he was probably supposed to follow and that he's getting paid to follow. But he took the time to have a little 5-minute chat with us before heading out, and said, you know, okay, I've got this itinerary, but I'll go anywhere. Where would you like to go? And because I had already been to Paris 3 or 4 times, and even though it was Chris's first time, we did this at the end of our trip. So we had already been in the city for 4 or 5 days at that point. We had seen a lot of the major sites. You know, we had had lunch under the Eiffel Tower, and I had taken them to see some of the big sites. So we felt like we had checked those off our list. So what we said to him was, take us to your favorite places. Where do you live in the city? And I guarantee you, we saw nooks and crannies that probably no one else has seen, and that we certainly never would have seen because we didn't even know they existed if we were just on our own. And so the places that he took us were not tourist attractions and major landmarks. They were, this is my favorite door, and here's the history behind the carvings of it. Yes. And this is my favorite bench. You know, he took us to a park, and this is my favorite bench where I like to sit and read this book or this book. I mean, you just can't, there's no price tag for that kind of an experience.
No, and you said something that it's very common. Like, you could do all your research in the tour books ahead of time with restaurants. And I mean, you're going to be able to obviously identify amazing ones from websites, recommendations. But when you're there asking the tour guide, the taxi driver, the local establishments, you are going to get a completely different experience. It is usually going to be less expensive because it's off the beaten path, and it's going to be more meaningful every single time. So yeah, I think you and I are exactly the same. Big tours, I could never do, but customized, looking for what you want to do is always going to be the way to go. And you're right, they're generally not that much more expensive if it's something you're going to do.
Yeah, and if they are, they're worth every penny. They really can make a total difference.
Right, because you saw things you never saw before.
Yeah.
After being at,
yeah. I'll make this story quick and we'll wrap up. But so I had a similar experience in Prague. You know, I had heard, everyone who heard I was going to Prague said, oh my gosh, you're going to love Prague. And people who hadn't been to Prague were so incredibly jealous that I was going to Prague with a girlfriend. And I get to Prague, and I think it was because I had allowed other people to build it up in a certain way so big in my mind that I was going expecting it to be one way, and it was nothing like what I expected it to be. And so initially I was not falling in love with Prague, and it was really shocking to me, and I was really sad about it. And I was like, why am I the only one who doesn't love Prague the way the whole rest of the world appears?
What's wrong with
to love Prague, you know?
Yeah.
And so I let myself sleep on it. And we got up the next morning and we decided to hire a private guide to go on a walking tour of Prague.
Yeah.
And everything shifted. everything shifted for me, because now, you know, I'm not just looking at generic amazing architecture,
right.
but architecture that I know nothing about, or
Right.
and it's more than that, because the walking guide that we ended up getting was like a fourth or fifth generation guide.
Wow.
You know, born and raised in Prague, family from there as well. And just the personal stories and the family stories that she was able to share with us, and then tie those into places that she took us and tell us, you know, this is where my grandmother did this, or this is where my mother took me when I was 3 years old. It brings the human experience into the place. And to me, like, that's where all the magic comes together. And that's what brings history alive when we're in different places like that.
And what's also good about it is, I cannot remember the name for the life of me, but there is a certified guide they have pretty much in England, France, and Italy. I forget what certification it's called, but they have to train for it. And they are specific to a certain component, whether it's their history, their architecture. They might, know something about, the ancient ruins, for example. So you can have different interests. Not everyone who goes to Europe is interested in history, right? There are people who could care less, don't even want to go in one museum, but they may want to spin on that. They might be interested in how did they get the water through the aqueducts? Like, that might be the thing that they want to know. And through, to your point, the private guides, they can help assess what you need and create a story that interests you. They can marry you with that city or that location a little better than just a generic one will ever do.
Yeah, 100%. Love it. Okay, last question, and we'll bring it back to Berlin, since that's the most meaningful experience you've had. When you think of Berlin, what feeling does it give you?
I am regenerated. It's alive. It is. You go to some cities that you feel might be old, that they're not recreating themselves. I feel when I'm there, when I say alive, it's a city that is still in the mode of recreating who it is and what it wants to be and how it's going to grow, how it's going to change its architecture, how it's going to change in their design and their fashion. Like, you see it all around you. They're not necessarily stuck in their ways. They're looking at how to adapt and move forward, but at the same time reflect and love what makes them who they are. So it's just this feeling of you're just lightning is going through you as you're looking all around, that nothing is sitting still, nothing is stale, nothing is rotting. It's all new. And that's what I love about it.
Which is a perfect way to wrap up our conversation today.
Awesome.
Because that's kind of travel in general, isn't it? Right? The way you just described Berlin.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Now we need to get Berlin on your list. But this has been great, Bonnie. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, Dana. I appreciate it. This is great.
Thank you for doing this with me. And perhaps there will be another.
Perhaps there will.
What's next, right?
Right. It's always what's next. We need something to look forward to. Makes me happy.
On to our next adventure.
Absolutely.
All right. And until then, andiamo.
Andiamo. Bye.
Love you.
Ciao.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye.